When you were born, you were a conscious being and no more. You had no opinions, no knowledge, no thoughts, and no memories. Your mind was blank. In the truest sense, you were nothing but pure spirit. That magic spot behind the eyes called you or I. Mankind was also born. And just as infants grow to adulthood, people evolved from primitive creatures into modern human beings. In the beginning, the human mind had little more than infant awareness. It was conscious and alert, but ignorant and unenlightened. The workings of nature mystified it. Forces like smoke and mist were as bewildering as the mind itself. They flowed. They had form. Surely they lived. They must be forces of nature, spirits. And what about the power of spirits? Even though cold and gentle, could not the mists invade the skull and take the soul as forces of mystery? When angry, could the clouds not strike with fire and fury? They lurked even in the earth, these forces and spirits of destruction. To the first humans, life at best was a handful of frightened years. Then a great event happened. People discovered that the spirit called fire could be turned against nature. So, like an infant standing for the first time, mankind evolved a reasoning stance. Humans began to control nature. And if they could not control a natural event, ancient people reasoned that perhaps they could appease its spirits. And so, during the infancy of the human mind, religion and art emerged from spiritual fear. As the ages passed, cultures evolved and religions grew with the emerging power of mind. Simple spirits became sophisticated gods in the image of man and woman, gods who led racy lives and required elaborate rituals from the mortals on earth. But civilization progressed not so much from bribing the gods as from the power of reason. It was reason that harnessed nature, and reason that built cities and highways, because it was reason that created science. Ancient science was not the same as modern science, because the classical scholars did not discover the final steps in the scientific method. But Aristotle and the Greek philosophers carried their knowledge to a height that wasn't excelled for another 2,000 years. For the Greeks assumed that every event had a natural, not a supernatural cause, and that by applying the innate power of reason, the human mind could explain everything in the universe by comparing specimens, classifying nature, gaining enough insight to lay the foundations of medicine. They even concluded that mental disorders, like epilepsy, had natural causes as well as cures. The power of reason had attacked the forces of ignorant fear. But not leaving peacefully, the past returned with a vengeance, and barbarism once again ruled human cultures. Once more, life was mainly survival. Pleasures of the body were the main reason for living. The best minds devoted themselves to religion, where faith, not the truths of science, was the final goal. The devil, heir to the Stone Age demons, lurked everywhere. Anyone acting the least bit strange could be taken for one of the devil's followers. Unfortunately, this included the mentally ill, and it was discovered that witches were quite flammable. But the forces of reason survived, and with the Renaissance, the fathers of modern science began to explore the world with a fresh eye. Great students of anatomy, like Leonardo da Vinci, recorded what they saw, not what they were told they ought to see. Once again, a scientific attitude arose. Why, wondered Sir Isaac Newton, do apples fall downward? What prevents them from flying upward? Inventing the telescope, Galileo gazed with new excitement upon a different universe. As the Greeks had predicted, one could now see that the heaven and earth were governed by natural laws, and discovering them promised strange and wonderful insights. A new way of thinking, the scientific method, was lifting us to a new world, the 20th century. An engineered world where technology builds our paths and our caves, and science leads us through life. A world where machines carry us. A world where machines pull our burdens. A world where machines solve our problems and follow our commands. A pleasurable life of entertainment and civilized convenience. A life based on knowledge and a culture in which discovery is held basic to living. Through medicine, facts lead us to a long, safe life. And through engineering, to high pleasure and the good life. But every advance has its price. The 20th century pollutes. Modern life demands a tribute of stress. Each day is a hustle. It bustles along with tensions and strains. Everywhere people crowd together, and living can drive us past the limits of sanity. To escape, we try to relax in the style of the 20th century. Electronic pleasure of an electronic age. A quest for sanity, but perhaps in a desperate direction? The 20th century, with all its miracles, has carried us to the edge of mental health. And what is life without a mind? Sanity, insanity, life, death, man has always pondered his essence. 500 years ago, Shakespeare's Hamlet mused over the mind of Yorick, his old friend.
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy.
And 40,000 years before Hamlet, a man in a cave painted tribute to a comrade's soul. Man has always pondered his essence. But the 20th century can gaze into the workings of the living brain as no other age ever could. We use the scientific method, a marvelous gift from the Renaissance. By turning a scientific eye to anatomy, Leonardo and other great minds began the ascent to modern medicine. It's a short step from dissecting a corpse to researching a cure. Embedded in the skull as it was, the brain drew the anatomist's attention. And inevitably, as a product of the brain, the mind would draw the physician's attention. One of the first students of the mind was Friedrich Mesmer, a Swiss physician who discovered that certain ailments could be cured through hypnosis. However, Dr. Mesmer refined his hypnotic art to the point of mysticism, departing the straight and narrow path of scientific medicine. By the late 1800s, hypnotism had become a fad among the European elite, as portrayed in this play for the theaters of Paris. Even Dr. Sigmund Freud, who studied Mesmer's techniques, was fascinated by the hypnotic trance. However, Freud soon found that the secret fantasies and urges of his patients were so intriguing and important that he developed a method of penetrating the unconscious mind in the waking state. Calling his method psychoanalysis, he aimed at exposing the hidden memories that led to disorders of both mind and body. But properly speaking, Freud was a psychiatrist, curing psychic ills. Other students of the mind were also emerging, psychologists, and their primary goal was knowledge. They wondered how the brain operated. The early psychologists were actually physiologists and neurologists who used living animals in their studies. One of the most creative was Franz Joseph Gall, who speculated that specific parts of the brain control specific parts of the body. However, like Friedrich Mesmer, Dr. Gall extended the implications of his theory a bit too far. He founded phrenology, a quasi-scientific discipline which assumed that by assessing the size, shape, and proportions of a person's head and facial features, you could predict his or her intellect, temperament, and character. By the 1870s, neurophysiologists placing electrodes in living animal brains had discovered that the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. And in 1879, Wilhelm Wundt founded the first laboratory devoted solely to the study of human behavior. Later, in another laboratory, the classic rat was first run through the classic maze. And the classic chimp had to use her ingenuity to earn her reward, the classic banana. But by far the most famous of the early psychologists was Ivan Pavlov with his principles of classical conditioning. In this original footage filmed in Pavlov's laboratory, we see his dogs salivate at the ticking of a metronome. They have been conditioned to associate the sound with feeding. Today, psychology has journeyed far beyond the simple facts of Pavlovian conditioning. Around the world, researchers by the hundreds of thousands labor to expose the truths beneath the human condition. Applied to society at large, their findings help steer the future of our species. Yet, just what is the method of thought that's made scientific study of the mind possible? The scientific method is a set procedure of thinking which helps us perceive the world through a process of unbiased, unemotional reasoning. This is a method based on controlled experimentation rather than armchair speculation. Its purpose is to find the causes by which the physical world operates, and once we understand the causes, to express them as general principles. Understanding principles helps us predict the outcome of future events. To the Greek and Renaissance methods, we have added a system of testing. We call it experimentation. By always testing what we observe and always testing what we believe, we're able to remove the emotional bias we normally feel toward our own ideas. And after enough experimenters have tested a finding, we finally accept or reject it. The scientific method has 4 basic steps. First, observation. Suppose you observe that an infant of 4 months tries to touch a mobile hanging over its crib, but can't seem to coordinate her hands with her eyes. You observe this many times. As a scientist, you go to the second step of reasoning. You suggest a cause as to why the infant can't grasp the object. This is called the hypothesis. You hypothesize that infants at 4 months don't possess enough hand-eye coordination. Now you test your hypothesis. This is step 3. You experiment. You try several sizes of objects. You manipulate and control your experiments in a number of ways. Finally, in step 4, you assess your data and decide whether your hypothesis was right or wrong. Since none of the infants tested was able to pick up the pellet, you decide that as a general rule, 4-month-old infants probably lack the coordination for picking up small objects. Now, admittedly, this is a simplified account. Most experiments are more complex. And obviously, we must always keep an open mind because experimental results may astonish us or even defy common sense. For centuries, most people agreed with those who said, only birds can fly. People have no wings. But there were those who questioned and experimented with flying machines. After years of testing, they succeeded. Science has lifted us from the ground and flown us into the 20th century. And the modern miracles, the cars, the lights, the ships, the airplanes, the computers, have made life incomprehensibly more convenient than Stone Age man could ever have dreamed. The demons of lightning and fire are harmless now. But it's obvious that now our worst enemy is the human mind. So we must try to understand our human behavior, complex as it is. To keep the whole person in mind, many psychologists have adopted what is called the holistic approach. Holistic psychology includes 3 distinct viewpoints. The first is physiological. The physiologist views man as a complex biological machine, a masterpiece of throbbing nerves, pulsing blood, and flowing hormones, which produce the living brain. Mind is simply a product of brain. The second viewpoint is the intrapsychic. In the intrapsychic view of psychology, the brain, with its 15 billion neurons and their infinite cross-connections, is far too intricate for any physiologist ever to comprehend. To the intrapsychic theorist, mind adds up to more than the physiologic whole. With its goals, fantasies, feelings, memories, values, the mind controls the body. And finally, the social behavioral viewpoint. In this outlook, humans are social creatures, and the minds of social creatures cannot operate independently of others. Our goals, fantasies, feelings, memories, and values are molded by contact with a social world. Now, in themselves, each of these psychological viewpoints is narrow and restrictive. But in the holistic approach, which incorporate all these viewpoints, we have a method for coping with the common ills of 20th century life. Problems like the addiction to drugs or alcohol, or the inescapable urge to gamble, or suicidal depression. The wide variety of contemporary human problems requires a variety of therapies.
Police, Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to talk to you.
What?
We've got a report there's some problem with your child. We'd like to come in and take a look.
There is no problem with my child.
Well, this will only take a minute. I just have to see for myself to make sure she's all right.
I don't understand what
It's absolute routine, and I'm going to have to take a look at her.
There is no problem.
Psychologists try to help many of these people. Here, for example, a psychotherapist tells a patient to hold on to her, to hold on no matter how the therapist struggles to escape. This brings out the patient's hidden resentments of her own mother, who neglected her years before. Once in the open, perhaps these feelings can be identified and probed.
Keep coming. Let it go. Let it go. You should have been cherished. Yeah. You should have been cherished. Your mother gave up on you.
This is how psychology may help one person. But what about you? You're probably a healthy, normal person with no major conflicts. Your biggest worry is where you're going in life. And probably you only think about that once in a while, when you're not occupied by the trivia of daily life. So what can psychology do for you? Well, what psychologists have learned about work boredom may change your job. The findings on tension and stress might save you a thrashing or two. And the insights to violence and aggression could save your life. But more than the practical side is your responsibility to this modern world of ours. The task of psychology is to design a better world, and the design is your choice. Or is it? Perhaps you're incapable of good, wise choices if you don't have a modern understanding of human behavior. It's true that today we laugh at the demons who plagued our Stone Age ancestors. But the earth still spins and the sun still sets, for we still live on the same planet as they did. However, now the sun is rising on a new world, and the world we are building will reflect our understanding or our ignorance of human behavior. Be it nuclear ruins or futuristic paradise, the results can only depend on knowing ourselves. The demons, it seems, have kept up with the times and, hiding away in our brains, have merged with the human spirit.
Hello, I'm Paul Napier, your host for this series on human psychology. And psychology covers an enormous area, all of life. It's a big branch of science, but of all the sciences, psychology is most concerned with you. Why you do the things you do, crave the things you crave, fantasize what you fantasize, and think what you think. More simply, psychology explains why you and I, all of us, behave the way we do. Understanding human behavior is a challenge because human beings are the products of so many influences. But when you study human behavior as the life story subject it is, your life and mine, you find that it can change your outlook on life as a whole and your part in it. It can make a change in you, and quite possibly in the world.